so we'll get started here. What is our first order of business? REACH codes. Andrea?
That's me.
Andrea? How do you say, Andrea?
Good evening. My name is Andrea Chow. I'm the sustainability analyst for the city. I'm here tonight to talk about proposed REACH codes for the 2019 building code. So the city of San Mateo demonstrated leadership in sustainability when the city council adopted Energy Code and Green Building Code REACH codes that went into effect January 1, 2017. This included requirements for mandatory solar and electric vehicle readiness. But as part of the state's 3-year code cycle, the city's REACH codes will expire this year, December 31st, 2019. So I'm here tonight to ask for City Council feedback and direction on proposed REACH codes for the upcoming 2019 building code. This will help us further reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our building sector and help the city continue to meet our climate action plan goals. So I'm going to start with a little bit about REACH codes. So as I said before, the building code is adopted every 3 years. The last code cycle was adopted in 2016, went in effect January 1, 2017, and the next code cycle will be adopted this year and go into effect January 1, 2020. So the city's existing REACH codes will expire this year. Cities and counties can adopt local amendments that go beyond what is required in state codes, and this effort is called REACH codes. The REACH codes are focused on 2 sections of the California Code of Regulations, the Energy Code and Green Building Code. So the Energy Code contains requirements regarding energy efficiency for new construction, and the Green Building Code deals with requirements related to EV readiness, water efficiency, and more. For the Energy Code REACH codes, cost-effectiveness studies are required to prove that the REACH codes are cost-effective or financially responsible and do not represent an unreasonable burden to applicants. So those are required to be filed with the California Energy Commission. That's unlike the Green Building Code REACH codes, which don't require this formal analysis. This slide shows the REACH codes that were adopted in 2016. The city of San Mateo adopted 2 Energy Code REACH codes and 2 Green Building Code REACH codes. The Energy Code REACH codes included mandatory solar installation on all new construction, cool roof installation on multifamily and non-residential projects with low-sloped roofs. And to remind you what a cool roof is, cool roofs have lighter color and a minimum sun reflectance, so this can help with reducing the cooling costs of a building. For Green Building Code REACH codes, the city adopted a higher percentage of EV readiness than what the state required. And we also required laundry to landscape diverter valves be installed in single-family homes. And so laundry to landscape diverter valves allow for the installation of gray water systems from laundry machines in the future. So 2016 was very different from the process we are going through now for our REACH codes. There are 2 major supporting efforts that are focused on supporting cities in adopting REACH codes. I'll start with the statewide Codes and Standards Program. The statewide Codes and Standards Program is leading the cost effectiveness studies for the entire state. They are only focused on Energy Code REACH codes. The statewide program's cost effectiveness study analyzed how to encourage building all electric buildings, and they studied the maximum energy efficiency you could require above what the state is going to require in the 2019 building code. So again, this is really different from what we did in 2016, where the city contracted directly with our own consultant to do a cost-effective study analysis and studied specific options for San Mateo. In 2016, we also didn't have Peninsula Clean Energy leading the effort to support cities across San Mateo County in adopting REACH codes. PCE has been focused on Energy Code, REACH code development, as well as REACH codes related to electric vehicle readiness. They're developing model ordinances that cities can adopt, and they're working directly with cities to customize the results of the cost effectiveness study and develop ordinances that fit the city. Peninsula Clean Energy is also offering a $10,000 grant to cities to offset the city staff time on REACH code efforts. So based on the supporting efforts of the statewide program and PCE, staff have focused on 3 areas to develop the most impactful approach through our building REACH codes. So these 3 areas are encouraging building electrification, mandatory solar, and electric vehicle infrastructure readiness. And I'm going to go into each of these in detail. So building electrification. There's been a lot of interest in mandating that new construction be all electric, or encouraging building electrification, which means that the buildings would not have any natural gas services. All electric buildings have electric appliances for heating, clothes drying, and cooking. And this image that I've included on the slide really depicts the typical natural gas usage in buildings.
You might as well keep going.
So more on building electrification. The interest in building electrification stems from the fact that Peninsula Clean Energy is providing 90% carbon-free electricity, and so eliminating the use of natural gas can really greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. To date, the city has not seen any all-electric buildings constructed, but we know there are a few projects looking at this option that are in the pipeline. So there are 2 pathways to encourage building electrification. I want to point out that mandating that all new construction be all electric through this building REACH code process is not currently allowed by the state or CEC. So the recommended approach, and what we've seen other jurisdictions pursue, is this 2-pathway approach. So what we recommend is encouraging building electrification through this two-pronged approach. So you give 2 options. 1, building the all-electric building at the minimum efficiency that's required by code, or allowing a mixed fuel building that uses both natural gas and electricity, but requiring that building be built at a higher energy efficiency level. And this is the approach the statewide program analysis looked at and what the cost effectiveness studies focused on. So this is our proposed REACH code to address building electrification for new construction of single family and duplex and of new office use buildings. So the cost effectiveness study indicated that building all electric may actually result in a reduced cost at the time of construction for some building types. So starting with single family and duplex, the study found that builders typically save $5,300 of an all-electric single-family home compared to the construction of a comparable mixed-fuel home. So this cost savings is largely due to the elimination of constructing new natural gas infrastructure. They're actually seeing a cost savings at this time. Staff is also considering exempting ADU, accessory dwelling unit, construction from this requirement. So similarly, for an all-electric office building, it would cost $57,300 less to construct an all-electric office building compared to a comparable construction of a mixed-fuel building. So the table on the screen focuses on the REACH codes for these 2 types of buildings. And what I've presented are 2 REACH code options. Want to highlight, because we are looking for your feedback specifically on the different thresholds. So for single family duplex, to meet the proposed REACH code, we're asking that they either meet we're asking for your feedback on whether they should meet a 10% or 15% above state code. And then for office use, we are looking for your feedback on whether or not 5% or 10% makes sense. So we we've reviewed some cost analysis to understand the estimated impact at the time of construction. And so we had included some analysis in the staff report to show that the increased cost of construction to go 10% or 15% for the single family or duplex building is estimated at $900 or $1,300 respectively. And the types of measures
Sorry, Andrew, the cost of what now?
So I'm going back to the single family and duplex.
Yeah.
So the cost of a mixed fuel single family building to meet the 10% or 15% above state code in energy efficiency, it would cost $900 or $1,300 for 15%.
And is there any like future savings associated with that cost? I mean, are you factoring in like how much they might save on energy in the future, or is that just a cost? Or
This is the cost at the time of construction.
But didn't you just say the construction costs are actually lower without the natural gas infrastructure?
Yeah, sorry. So the cost of building the single family home all electric would be a cost savings. The cost of following pathway 2 and building a mixed fuel building that is 10% above state code would cost $900 more compared to that baseline of a mixed fuel building.
And you're recommending mixed fuel, that's why we're focused on this mixed fuel, is that?
So the building electrification, to encourage building electrification, we have to have two options for builders. We have to have an all-electric pathway and a mixed fuel pathway. It is then up to the builder to decide which pathway they would like to pursue. So I introduced that single-family homes built all-electric to code can actually save you money because you don't have to build that natural gas infrastructure. And then I wanted to bring up the impact of this potential REACH code of mandating that mixed fuel homes exceed state code requirements. And this is the cost analysis that we found from the consultant. And so, for example, builders would need to consider energy efficiency measures related to the building envelope, to water heating, and duct distribution. And that's kind of the estimate that I was given to meet the mixed fuel requirements.
So each code has to have an either or.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so there's 4 on here because I'm asking, so each code has to have the 1 and 2.
Yep.
But what I'd like to hear from you is should we recommend this 10% or this 15% for single family and duplex type buildings?
Okay, I got you.
Both packages must include the all electric and mixed fuel options.
So all electric would be cheaper and there's a lot of incentive to do that. And then the mixed fuel actually costs you a little more, but you have to provide that choice.
Yes.
Okay, all right, I got you. You want to keep going or do you want to hear from us now? What do you want to
I
do?
think keep going and then come back to the
You
questions.
got it. Okay.
Great. I wanted to go back and talk about why we just talked about single family and duplex and office use for encouraging building electrification. There's a reason we don't have a proposed REACH code for multifamily for encouraging building electrification. There are a couple reasons. One is that the preliminary analysis done by the state didn't focus on multifamily of 4 stories or more, so we actually don't have the official results yet of that study. Preliminary results based on the hotel prototype that was studied indicated it might be more challenging to to encourage building electrification. And then given the city's priority to encourage housing development, and without the cost effectiveness study, we figured it made sense to focus on these two different building types.
And what was the determining factor with making that choice?
So that we did not get to determine what was studied in the statewide programs. So they studied certain building types, single family, duplex, office buildings, and hotels.
And I think a key issue, just to further, is how you have to have the 2 options that Andrea just mentioned. So the higher level of energy efficiency did not prove to be cost effective for the multifamily construction, or they think it will not be cost effective. So if you can't provide two options, then you can't mandate.
Legislate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So this
Alrighty.
was building electrification. Okay. So the city required the installation of solar photovoltaic or solar thermal systems on new construction since 2016. State code will actually catch up to this requirement and require that residential construction, 3 stories or less, to install solar PV to offset annual electricity usage in this next code cycle. The city has the opportunity to still exceed this requirement by extending the city's minimum solar PV mandate to all new construction, because the state code does not have a mandatory solar requirement for commercial or residential construction that's 4 stories or more. So our recommended proposed REACH code addresses this set of buildings that is not covered by the state's mandate. So if you look at the chart, what I've compared is what the 2019 state code will require, which is solar PV installation, again on residential constructions that's 3 stories or less. And what I have carried over is our proposed REACH code, which is minimum size solar installation on multifamily 4 stories or more and non-residential buildings. This is what we had adopted in 2016. I'm gonna move on. So that's mandatory solar. Okay, and then the third focus area is electric vehicle infrastructure readiness. So building electric vehicle charging infrastructure is extremely important because on-road transportation accounts for 50% of our community's greenhouse gas emissions. So while we strive to get people out of their cars and reduce single occupancy vehicles, we're also hoping our community will choose to drive cleaner vehicles. And so one barrier to purchasing an EV is the availability of charging infrastructure. And so the Green Building Code has electric vehicle readiness requirements for all new construction. I also wanted to point out that EV ownership has grown rapidly in California. In 2018, PG&E reported that EVs accounted for 10% of new vehicles in the PG&E territory. So EV charging infrastructure is necessary to keep up with EV ownership. I also wanted to note that the cost of installing electric vehicle supply equipment at the time of new construction is significantly less expensive than retrofitting later. This has a lot to do with trenching. So electric vehicle infrastructure readiness does not necessarily mean that the actual electric vehicle supply equipment is installed. So I wanted to introduce 2 terms. One is EV capable, and one is where the electric vehicle supply equipment is actually installed. So when we say EV capable, we're saying that there's raceway and panel capacity to support the 40 amp dedicated branch circuit. And when we're saying that the electric vehicle supply equipment is installed, we're talking about a level 2 EV charging supply equipment is installed and it's ready to go to plug in your vehicle. So this table summarizes what the state is requiring and how our proposed REACH code will exceed that state's requirement. So our proposed REACH codes for multifamily are 15% EV capable spots instead of 10%. And then for non-residential, we are proposing 15% EV capable, of which a certain percentage of EVSE be installed. So I understand if you've looked at the staff report, this may look a tiny bit different than what you saw. So I have included this table that you're seeing is more updated than what I have included in the staff report. So although a cost effectiveness study is not required for submission to the state, Peninsula Clean Energy conducted a cost impact analysis to help us really understand what we're asking of developers. So the analysis found for multifamily that it costs roughly $1,350 per additional EV capable space to meet our proposed REACH code of 15%. And then for non-residential new construction, the analysis found a similar number, about $1,260 per additional EV capable space to meet the REACH code for the number of EV capable spaces. And then in addition, the installation of the actual electric vehicle supply equipment, that's the EVSE, would cost roughly $4,000 per space.
So before you go on, the multifamily there is going to include anything above 3 units?
Yes.
And on the non-residential, you say 50% EV capable, of which 3% of the 15% or 3% of the total?
3% of the
total
15%.
number of units. Oh,
No, on 15.
3% of the 15% of units, or 5% of the, okay.
Because 15% are capable, and then of those, you can decide whether to make 3% of them actually have the equipment with them, or 5% of them.
Yeah, so, and that's
That's a choice.
That's
Yeah, that's
another discussion point that
Yeah.
we'd like your
Okay.
feedback
Yeah.
on.
Okay.
So, I mean, in general, we're looking for your feedback on this REACH code of reaching beyond what the state's requiring. I did want to run through a quick example of a parking structure and what that means for non-residential development. Using a 500 space garage as an example, 15% would be 75 spaces would be EV capable. And then if you want to look at the 3% versus 5%, 3% would equal 15 spaces that would have the actual EV charging equipment installed. And then the 5% would be 25 spaces.
And as a prime example, that's roughly the size of the parking garage we're gonna build, the new city public parking structure. So, you know, this would apply to that, because it'll likely be built under this REACH code. So it's 25 spaces out of a 500 space structure with actual EV chargers. Is that the right amount? Is that too much? It's a lot higher.
But we have the capability everywhere else for later installation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently in our downtown, the most we have in any one location is 4.
Yeah.
So it would be a big leap up
Most we as a city have.
in any one single garage location.
How about the
That's
Hillsdale Mall?
$4,000 each?
Total is more than 4,000. 4,000 is to take it from the ready to the plus equipment.
What was your question?
The new parking structure at the mall? How many do they have?
They're not subject to this code. They would be subject to the prior code, which was 10% EV ready. So I don't know if they installed, how many they installed, if they chose to take any all the way.
A whole bunch.
A whole bunch.
They have a whole bunch.
So parking at, if the passage got approved, would fall under the new code if it gets approved?
Mhm.
Okay.
Great. All right, I wanted to share a little bit about the stakeholder engagement that we've done. Both city staff and Peninsula Clean Energy have worked directly to outreach to the developer community. In March, PCE held a workshop targeting developers to seek feedback as the REACH codes were being developed. And then more recently, staff has reached out to 4 local developers, including commercial, residential, and nonprofit. So some of the highlights, one of the commercial developers was concerned about how we encourage building electrification, especially for retail and restaurant use buildings because of the need for natural gas for cooking. But that's one of the reasons some of our REACH codes are just focused for encouraging building electrification in single-family duplex and office use buildings at this time. The nonprofit developer pointed out a concern about the impact of REACH codes on affordable housing. We were able to connect with Peninsula Clean Energy, and we're happy to learn about how they are working on establishing a program targeting nonprofits to help pay for the cost of additional infrastructure needed to meet adopted REACH codes in our region. So that's something we're excited to learn about. In general, the market rate developers understood that the EV requirements were going up and that this really aligned with the trend they were seeing and the demand that they were seeing for EV chargers. But one other concern we learned about was this issue of right-sizing electrical capacity. So this is something that can vary a lot by project, but I mentioned when we talk about making something EV capable, there is a requirement to have that electrical capacity. And sometimes it does depend per project. You might hit this threshold on a project and trigger the need for additional transformers. And so that's a cost that you need to consider, and we are working with PG&E to understand more about this concern and its impact. We also went out to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission throughout this process. We presented the preliminary findings of the cost effectiveness studies, and they provided guidance on the proposed REACH codes that were in this presentation. And then I wanted to mention the last code cycle. The city was the first city in San Mateo County to adopt our REACH codes. We're very proud of that. And this year we're trying to lead the charge again, but I have learned from other city staff that there's interest across the peninsula in pursuing REACH codes. And that's it. And I'm really looking for your feedback and direction on all of 3 of these areas and the proposed REACH codes.
Okay. And you got the $10,000 grant for your time for this?
We did.
From the county? Okay, good. And then it's about, what, $70,000, upwards of $70,000 to replace a transformer? Do you know that cost? Or is it $300,000? I
It
knew that
really
number.
varies by
Okay.
project. So for our downtown parking garage that we're gonna build, Mid-Penn has indicated we will need to go add an extra transformer to
Yep.
hit the 15%, and that might cost upwards of $200,000 for that
Okay.
particular project. Depending on the size of the project, it may be a lower cost, as low as $50,000, but it really varies, and not every project is gonna reach that point where it trips the need for
Sure.
an additional transformer, so it's really hard to estimate what that cost is.
I'm sure PCE will have come up with a grant program for those transformers
good.
by next year.
We'll take it. And one more just quick question. I didn't see anything, and then I'm sorry to hog, I'll turn it
Go
over
ahead,
for
go
questions. But I didn't see anything that dealt with, if you're going to mandate the solar, storing some of that solar that you're creating by way of either batteries or, this concept of microgrids and will we ever get to that point? You're just not there yet? Where does that factor in? I don't know enough about it, but I know enough to ask about it.
So there were some codes that were looked at that looked at the battery storage, and that was one of the topics of discussion with the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. But the costs of battery storage are still very much fluctuating, and they felt at this point in time for this code cycle, again, which is only 3 years, that mandating on-site battery storage along with solar was maybe a step too far. So that was one of the key points of direction that actually the commission provided that informed where we are right now.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for indulging me. Now, Eric, did you have questions?
I guess the only question I have is, when I was going through all the different choices, I was thinking, okay, the more energy savings, the better. I like those options better. And then when you talked about the developer feedback, it sounds to me like aside from some of the restaurants, which this doesn't even cover, there wasn't that much pushback. Is that my understanding correct?
So there wasn't. I will say that the majority of the developers were, although they build both commercial and multifamily, they were mostly thinking of upcoming multifamily projects. So the building electrification doesn't impact them because of the cost effectiveness. Again, study wasn't available. So we didn't get a lot of feedback. They were kind of just quiet about that impact on, say, commercial, and most of them aren't building single-family homes.
So they're in that kind of midway, no man's land right now. Okay.
And my last question is, when you were talking to the different home builders with this, did you ever get the impression that this could create, if we went on the higher end of the scale, that it could make some housing infeasible or reduce their willingness to build housing?
No, primarily because the only ones really impacting The ones we're mostly concerned about multifamily, which is where the sort of the more affordability, whether or not it's actual affordable housing or multifamily. And, you know, the mandatory solar policy has been in place, so we have the exact same policy that we've had since the prior code cycle, and have never had any negative feedback about that. And the electric vehicle readiness sounded like something the feedback was that they were already considering this as something maybe necessary. So we did not get that feedback specifically. But we were being very careful about the building electrification option does definitely, it's a touchier subject for housing because of people really like cooking with natural gas. There's really no other way around it. So it is something that, you know, is right now is if you choose the option that doesn't include building electrification, it is an increased cost for development. So, you know, that's a choice for single family homes, but for multifamily, we are concerned about impacting affordability.
Thank you.
Just one. Which is the one that we don't have good studies or good information on? Multifamily? In the last 2 multifamily big projects that we built in San Mateo, I'm thinking specifically of
Joe, could you speak up a little bit?
888. Isn't 888 completely unbundled? And does 888 have natural gas going to each unit?
As far as our knowledge, there
Yeah.
have been no all-electric buildings built in San Mateo yet. So a couple of the projects in the pipeline, so my understanding is Passages and Waters Park are both considering it for their residential, but not, Passages is not considering that for their retail portion. But we have not, we checked with planning and building, and to our knowledge, nobody has actually done it yet.
I think we should check with Windy Hill and 4th Avenue because I believe they are.
The one that's currently under construction? Okay.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is that I know of, in terms of building electrification, that it was mentioned storage. 2 things about it. The cost of electricity, renewable energy, is coming down. So in the future, that should also be figured into the cost, because the cost of electricity is on its way down. Generation is becoming more plentiful and cheaper for renewable energy. And Raphael is here, so if you had something to add to this, when you get your chance, please go ahead and correct me. Storage also is coming down and is being looked at as a much more viable thing. And all of this relates to also mandatory solar, which will only help along with possible local distribution with reducing local demand. Additionally, right now, PCE is offering a program that will be supplementing costs for electric vehicle charging stations and readiness. And so I think we should ask Raphael about that too, because I think that could make a big difference in terms of how much we consider the feasibility of EV charging. Certainly, since transportation, well, there's no question there, so I'm sorry, but a couple of comments early.
No, that's okay.
I'm ready for public comment.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Then we'll open up for public comment. Do we have any speaker slips?
Looks like we got one.
Okay.
And then, Raphael, if you could please speak into the mic.
Members of the council and staff, Rafael Reyes. I'm a resident of the city of San Mateo. I'm here in my capacity as program director for energy programs for Peninsula Clean Energy. First of all, I want to thank the council and the staff for the continuing leadership work here at the city of San Mateo. It's incredibly important. And just as one data point from an economic standpoint, if as a region, San Mateo County reaches its target of 45,000 electric vehicles by 2025, our projections are that residents will save $50 million a year in reduced fuel costs for transportation. So that's just one data point to keep in mind. And all of the and much of the costs on the electric side, of course, are then in turn still being reinvested in the community. So significant economic value there. I'm very pleased also to reiterate PCE's continued technical assistance and funding for these efforts. As noted earlier, San Mateo has already secured the $10,000 in grant support and additional technical assistance, which is ongoing. Two comments here. One is on electric vehicle readiness. I would call out that there is a middle ground between EV capable, which is the state code, and EV installed. And one of the things that PCE is recommending is EV readiness, which actually means there's an outlet there of some kind, and it can make it easier for a driver, an apartment or condo to know that there is charging that can be easily installed there by seeing that the outlet is there, and they just put the EV charging equipment, which is a much simpler step than putting in the full circuit. So that's one item to consider. And secondly, on the note of affordable housing, we do recognize that while building electrification is less expensive to go all electric, there is definitely an additional capital cost associated with EV infrastructure, and PCE is developing a specific incentive program for affordable housing to address that capital cost. We're still refining the details of that, but we're anticipating a program of approximately $2 million over the next code cycle of 3 years. And that the intention is to cover most or all of the additional incremental cost of putting in this the REACH code targets above the state minimum. So again, we're still refining the specifics of that. This additional incentive funding will go to any affordable housing in cities that have adopted some form of REACH code. There are details in terms of the transformers and others that we're still working through the specific costs and how exactly we're going to handle that. But I'm happy to take questions from council members or staff with regards to this or any of the other items that have been discussed so far.
Okay, I may come back to you. Let me get the other public comment. And then if there are questions, we can certainly bring Mr. Reyes back.
Rich Hedges is
Yeah.
our next speaker.
May I address you from here?
No.
Yes.
No?
Microphone.
Microphone. It doesn't get picked up on the video, Rich, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Follow the rules. So I just wanted to segue in here a little bit to tell you that there is a development, multifamily development, that's all electric, and it's Harbortown.
Harbortown, you said?
Harbortown is all electric.
Okay.
We did that in 1979, and I think as great as the environment, it's also the hazards with natural gas. That's why we sought out an all-electric community, because most of the damage done in the earthquakes we've had in the Bay Area have been from fires from natural gas. Fully about 70% of this 1906 earthquake was from fires, not from the shaking of the ground. So I think that there are multiple reasons for having all electric developments. Now, we'll tell you this, when we bought the unit, electricity was cheaper than gas. It ain't that way now. I'm happy to hear that prices are coming down, but there is an additional cost for heating with electricity. It's not nearly as efficient as gas. But we don't mind that because we can afford it, and we feel a safety component that we wouldn't otherwise have. Now, with one caveat, so I'm not a liar, we do have one small line of natural gas coming in for our pool and our jacuzzi, but it's away from the other units. So, and our third pool, solar was put in originally to heat it because we didn't want natural gas, the developer didn't going through the development. It was not adequate, but since then we've replaced the solar with adequate solar to warm that pool as well. So it could be done with solar too to warm your pools. You don't need natural gas. Thank you.
How many units are in Harbortown?
312.
Okay.
So it's a fairly large development, 54 acres, 14 acres of trees. We love that.
Okay.
No other speakers.
Okay, great. So we'll bring it back to the council. Were there questions for PCE at all? No?
I wanted to ask if you could talk a little more about storage.
So on the point of storage, there's a lot going on in the industry, as you might imagine, and the costs of storage are rapidly coming down. However, there are significant complexities when considering what kind of storage is applicable where, under what conditions, and under what rate schedules. PCE is going to be engaging aggressively in this area, and we can anticipate some programs and incentives of various forms are very likely. On this topic, we are also relatedly engaging in a critical facilities resilience project. It's in a scoping phase, and we will be identifying facilities, working with the cities and others for potential facilities on which solar storage systems would be applicable. But per the comments of staff, it's difficult to gauge right now with clarity on a residential basis where exactly storage would be most effective, although we anticipate that going forward it will ultimately become quite widespread. It's just difficult to say that right now from a codes perspective.
Okay, let me ask you. I'm just thinking about things like hospitals, emergency command centers, things that need to stay up during power outages after a disaster, when perhaps a diesel generator that's somewhat outdated now might become unable to operate.
That's absolutely correct. So, and in fact, recently brought to my attention in the course of this critical facilities project has been the issue that getting diesel to such generators is actually a non-trivial issue. Many sites are contracted to have delivery of diesel, but there isn't actually a guarantee if there is an emergency that such diesel fuel could be delivered.
Right.
And whereas an on-site facility such as a solar storage system is much more likely to be reliable, and more reliable also than natural gas pipes, which are
Coupled
likely to
with
break.
rooftop solar generation and storage.
That's correct.
Right,
Yes.
okay.
Absolutely. One note to the prior comment, I completely agree with Mr. Hedges with regards to the benefits of electrification. I would note that thankfully the technology has progressed substantially over 1979, and now for residential applications and even some mid-sized applications, heat pump water and space heating actually can be as cost effective as natural gas. In fact, UC study has confirmed that for all of their dormitories, classrooms, labs, everything, they're going to go all electric, and it's based on a cost effectiveness study that shows that it's no more expensive than natural gas.
I think UC San Diego is like fully self-sufficient with their storage and what they're creating.
They have
Yeah.
added microgrids, that's correct, to solar
Yeah.
storage.
So one quick question, because you had mentioned sort of this third option between capable and actually having the equipment installed is the readiness. So do we know what the cost would be on that? I mean, is it does it add substantially to just put the plug where you're capable, or?
There is some added cost, and I'll defer to staff on the details, but to put in the circuit and the outlet. But I'll defer to Kathy and.
So it is something we considered, and it may make more sense on single family, but for multifamily, having like a plug and an outlet doesn't necessarily, you don't, like if you look at the charger we have at City Hall, it doesn't just plug in. So, for that reason,
It may not be compatible ultimately with whatever plug you put in.
It was that, and then differing we wanted to keep with the definition that the state was using and just say, okay, the state's requiring 10%, we're requiring 15. It just makes it a little bit more comprehensible for people coming in for building permits than to also require something like a different standard than the state's standard.
Got it.
So those were two considerations that we ultimately decided to go with, just the state definition that the state's using in their code.
Okay. Any other questions? Want to illustrate your preferences? Rick, you want to start with you?
Sure, in terms of building electrification, could you put back up the choices there, please, on that? Given, my concern overall for, the fact that as buildings become more and more efficient, the 50% for transportation in terms of emissions grows because they're a bigger part of what's left, right? And in the Bay Area, we have some issues with having some bad air quality days. And overall, we know that it's damaging our climate. I mean, scientists universally agree, with the exception of a few, that we only have a certain period of time to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm in favor of going with the most effective ways possible. And if I understood correctly, developers didn't really seem to have really strong preferences one way or another on this.
So you want B?
Yes,
Okay,
I'm looking at B.
both family and office.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and can we go to the other?
Yeah, but you could do solar, can you do all three?
Yeah.
Yes.
Take on the solar and then the
Yeah, yeah, if we
EV?
could see the other choices,
Okay.
I'll address them.
Thank you.
Is it easier to go one at a time?
This is keeping our current code in place, so there's no choices
Okay.
on this.
Nothing to
one.
decide.
Okay.
Rick, you're okay with that, I'm
Yeah, so
assuming?
this is the solar, and the proposed.
It's gonna stay the same.
I'm happy
Okay.
with what
Great.
we're proposing.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then where are you on the EV? You want 3 or 5%?
with the EVs, I think 5%.
Okay.
And otherwise, I'm happy with the multifamily proposal. Single family and duplex, it looks like no change, so,
Okay. So
Okay.
15% is fine with you on that proposed REACH
yes.
code for
Yeah,
multifamily?
no, I think that's excellent.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Do you want to go? Go.
I'm the same.
Same. 2 for Rick's
Okay.
options. Where are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm for that option as well. I'm still trying to figure out like what the negative of not going with that option is. Maybe some duplexes that really want to cook with gas are not gonna find it reasonable to do that. But other than that, speaking from somebody, a family that only uses a convection stove and no gas, I think it's fine, so.
Great. Okay.
Yeah,
Councilmember
for
Prescott.
the building electrification, I'm good with the proposed REACH code B. I mean, the cost for residents didn't seem to be that, for residential units, didn't seem to be that much. It was quite a bit more significant for office buildings, but, like I said, developers really didn't seem to have any concerns, so I'm good with that. On the solar, I think staying with what we're doing is just fine, and on the EV, I like the idea of the 5%, 50% EV capable and 5% installed. I think that's the way of the future, and we should be prepared to go in that direction.
Okay, me too. That's 5 for 5. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Chen, you got minimum wage for us? Okay, come on in. Oh, yeah. All of a sudden I saw Drew and I thought, did I skip over public comment? Because usually Drew goes.
Sorry.
Oh,
I wanted to make sure I updated it, so,
Hopefully you see.
I saw you and
Folder.
yeah.
you didn't speak and I thought, oh my gosh, I must not have done a public comment.
Here?
Okay,
Yes.
we're ready for you.
I heard about this.
You did that before, don't worry.
Huh?
Don't worry.
Thank you.
oh, your screen's real small.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Can you close the whole thing?
Try
I have
that all
other
over
things that don't
again.
work.
Thank you, Raphael.
It's picking on us.
You have it already.
Ways.
Yeah.
Maybe it has
It's
to do
there,
with
sorry
the kind
there.
of a piece of equipment we're using.
I think that's the difference.
That is not it.
Like it's, the whole thing we use is
Not everything is made.
I'm really bad with this mouse.
Just larger.
Yeah.
I think I say that every time you wear it.
Spring.
So this is almost what you have.
I always wish I had something Japanese to go to wear this because it's.
Oh, size-wise, it might be because your screen is so much bigger.
It will probably come up with that same error message, and last time we clicked OK, it worked.
You ready?
Ask PowerPoint, I'm ready.
Okay, great. Take it away.
Sorry, the PowerPoint's having some issues. I think you'll have to start without it.
It's been that kind of day.
Well, good evening, Mayor, City Council. I'm Jennifer Chen, the city's Economic Development Manager. I'll be providing you a update on our minimum wage ordinance and the status of regional efforts to get to $15 an hour by 2020. As a background, while this is loading, 4 years ago, the City Council identified an exploration of local minimum wage as a priority. So after extensive research, staff brought back an initial policy analysis and policy requirements at a study session in November in 2015, at which point Council expressed an interest in developing a local minimum wage and directed staff to investigate an implementation and outreach to local businesses via the Chamber and the DSMA. Afterwards, the citywide minimum wage was adopted in August of 2016, and the city was the first city in San Mateo County to have a higher minimum wage than the state starting January 1st of 2017. At that point, we had, I believe, $12 an hour. So if you had a slide, it would be implementation time. The city chose an incremental approach to gradually increase the minimum wage over 3 years. Currently, the private companies are at $15 per hour, and 501c3s are at $13.50. Starting January of 2020, everyone in the city will be at $15 per hour. Plus CPI. As local wages change annually, every October, the city sends mailers with bulletins, FAQs to all of our and other materials to all of our businesses in the city's business tax license database. We have also developed informal flyers for employers and employees. They're quite attractive. They have a woman and a man kind of showing notifications. All these materials are also available for are available in English, Spanish, as well as in Chinese. And all of these materials are available for download on the city's website. And as a reminder, our office still continues to serve as an initial point of contact for inquiries related to minimum wage. Kathy gets lots of phone calls. The city's minimum wage ordinance is complaint driven. The city contracts with the San Jose's Office of Equality Assurance to conduct investigations into complaints. Staff checks in with the office on a regular basis to know what's going on in different cases and how many complaints they've gotten. Even though we've received numerous phone calls, only 3 cases have been opened since implementation in 2017. Of the 3 cases, 2 of them were closed due to the businesses being sold, being transferred. Is there no slideshow available?
No, I don't think it's going to work.
Okay. And the remaining case resulted in a restitution of $1,485.88 to 3 employees. So the budget cost of implementing the minimum wage to date is $62,420. This includes most of the costs were in the initial 2 years of implementation, where $42,000 of the funds were spent on the first 2 years creating the collateral materials, outreach to low-income and minority communities, and sending out mailers to the businesses. The mailers are quite expensive each year we do it. And while the city has budgeted $30K for enforcement, the Office of OEA has, thank you. Okay, you can see, we'll run through it. Here's your background slide from before. Here's the attractive minimum wage collaterals that we've created. We talked about the enforcement already. And I'm on the budget costs. So even though OEA has charged, even though we've budgeted $30,000 a year for the San Jose's Office of OEA, we've only been charged $2,217 to date for implementation. This is not cost recovery for them, and they are planning to change towards a flat fee rate of approximately $10,000 for all the cities that they are implementing for. Continued implementation is estimated to be $20,000 annually. We're planning this for what San Jose wants, as well as annual mailers. And then additionally, the city, when we hire minimum wage employees, every time we increase by CPI, we will, depending on what the CPI rate is, for in 2020, it will result in a $3,000 increase in labor costs for the city. Since implementation, we have heard from the higher-end restaurants about their concerns on minimum wage. And the biggest concern is that they feel it's unnecessary because the tip employees are paid much more than minimum wage. And several restaurants like The Vault, 31st and Union, 3, and China Bee have added 3% local wage fee on the checks. We've also seen restaurants reduce the hours of operation and employee work hours in order to remain competitive. And finally, restaurateurs often feel that the minimum wage hinders their ability to compete with restaurants in the surrounding cities. To which I want to show you a graphic of counties, adjacent counties, and where they're at on minimum wage. In green, you'll see cities in San Francisco, which will get to $15.59 starting July 1st, because that's 15 plus CPI. Sunnyvale and Mountain View are already at 15 plus CPI. They're in green. The two cities in blue are at $13.50. They are Redwood City and Belmont. They will be at 15 by 2020, but currently they're just at $13.50. And the remaining cities on this map are at 15. Yes, Rick.
Your graphic here says that Belmont's at 15 now.
This should have been, that's an error. It should have been $13.50.
And additionally, Daly City has implemented minimum wage increase.
I did not realize that. Thank you.
Excuse me, Jennifer, when you're saying every other city there is at 15, so that's like Burlingame and Millbury?
Not Burlingame.
So
15 is Palo Alto, Los Altos, Cupertino, Santa Clara, San Jose. Is it not clear?
The only 3 in this county that have a higher minimum wage besides Daly City that we weren't aware of
Yeah.
are us, Belmont, and Redwood City. And I believe Redwood City is planning to meet up with our 15 plus CPI next year. Or
In July.
They're planning to eventually align with our minimum wage, although
Yeah.
Belmont adopted a different schedule.
They have shorter periods between their increases, so
Right.
they're going to catch up to us.
Right.
Yeah.
All of these cities in the area will have a higher local wage than the state. The state will reach 15 at 2023. So looking forward on minimum wage, again, starting January 1st, 2020, minimum wage will be at $15 plus CPI for all the employees in San Mateo. Cities of San Francisco, Mountain View, and San Jose are already at 15 plus CPI. And then due to CPI increase, our wages will continue to be higher than the state and require local implementation and enforcement of the policy. And that is my update.
Go ahead, yes.
Jennifer, I have a question. Sounds like it's the restaurants that have really been the voice of discontent. Do we have any numbers on whether we've lost any restaurants, whether they've either closed or moved to another city?
It's hard to say if that happened due to our minimum wage. We have had closures. The 2 restaurants I've mentioned that have sold, I mean, they're probably already hurting for business and therefore did not pay their employees the right rate. So it's hard to determine the cause and effect of that.
Okay.
That said, I will say that most of our restaurant spaces, when a restaurant goes out, we get a new restaurant in. So
It turned
we have
over
very
very
low
quickly.
vacancy of restaurants. Again, it seems to be impacting the higher end restaurants a little bit more than the more fast casual restaurants. So we are seeing a trend, and there may also be a market trend towards more away from the white tablecloth dining to more casual dining.
Any other questions? Questions? So the budget going forward, you're looking at what did you say, about 20 grand as
20K.
opposed to about this?
Yeah.
So the first year was 60 or the first 2 years was 60?
To date is 62K.
To
First-
date.
Right. And
Got
then
it.
the first 2 years is 42K
So you only need 20 now?
ongoing.
And then you think that'll be that way?
For the immediate future, depending on implementation costs from
I
San
have a
Jose.
question.
Hold on one second. Interestingly, that the San Jose folks were using, we've only drilled down about 2 grand. They say they've had more in staff, and all of a sudden it's 5 times more than what we ever spent on a retainer.
So I will say to their credit, they are really bad at invoicing. So they answer
I like
a
it, credit.
trillion phone calls on our behalf and just haven't, they're
Invoiced us
so
for the
busy
time.
that they haven't
Okay.
invoiced us for the time. And
Yeah.
so it behooves us to let them cost recover because we want them to continue being willing to implement this on our behalf.
So you
We
think
don't
they
have the
get to,
expertise
we're
in
getting
house.
10 grand worth of work?
We're getting plus 10K.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're in contact with them regularly.
great.
Yeah,
Question?
my question relates to the future. When the state reaches $15 an hour,
We're still gonna be ahead.
we'll still be ahead because of the CPI.
Right.
Okay. Because I was wondering if at some point,
We're at,
our costs for
right.
enforcement or so forth might actually come down. But we'll still be producing posters and we'll still be
So that-
hiring San Jose.
Right, unless at some point we decide to freeze or wait for the state to catch up. But right now, it's all gonna be ahead.
And that was a
Okay.
policy decision the council made at the time of adoption, was that instead of waiting at 15 for the state to catch up, was to start CPI increases and allow wages to continue to increase. And certainly if council feels differently, that's a direction that council can give. A big portion of the cost, besides the San Jose costs, the mailings are, I mean, we send out 8,000 plus
Yeah.
mailers.
It's about
with
10,000.
Thick packets, so
Right.
it's a significant cost. Plus
And then
the
you
staff
had
time.
East Palo Alto doing something, what were they doing?
Outreach to the community, talking to non-English speaking communities.
In this city? They
Yes.
came from East Palo Alto to do
Yeah.
that in this city?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a initial contract, initially when we were
Trying to push this-
rolling out the
yeah.
program, but now that it's established, people are pretty well aware that we have a higher wage.
So you don't need that.
And most of the inquiries we do get are people being confused about San Mateo City
City
versus
versus
county. Like 99% of inquiries.
There's a lot less adoption in this county compared to Santa Clara County, though.
Yeah. I like your little meme or whatever you say. Is that what it's called? What's it called?
It's a-
Okay, any more questions?
I have, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, forgive me.
No, no,
Okay.
no, go ahead with the public.
Oh, okay. Public comment.
I have no speaker slips.
Okay, then we'll close public comment. Do you have comments?
I do.
All right, go for it.
Regarding the CPI, I want to mention that has been standard practice pretty much throughout the work world, that if you're getting paid the minimum wage, you don't get a raise until the minimum wage goes up, right? Which is the reason why we looked at the CPI, because otherwise people can't keep up with the cost of living, fall farther and farther behind each year. So I am definitely in favor of continuing the program. I think the $20,000 that we pay annually to provide a really basic protection for low-wage workers in our city is well worth it. And I would advise that we stick with the CPI because it makes a difference. When you're on the bottom rung, it makes a difference.
I don't think there was any intent to change it. Were you asking us for a direction?
No.
on that
It's
one?
not.
Oh, okay.
It just came up, so I wanted.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
got it. Comments? It was just to receive information. Thank you so much. I'm glad to know it's not going to cost quite as much on a going forward basis. And that's it. I think we will adjourn the special meeting, study session.